There, and welcome to Delightful Dissent. It's episode 53 today, and if you were, and thank you for your patience if you were hoping to see this last week. So this is the rescheduled one, and it's great to see you. So today's guest is Sarah Weiler, who is a leadership coach and creative quitting expert. So welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. And today's assumption that we're going to be talking about, today's idea is get a proper job. And I think if you've ever struggled to come up with an answer to the question, what do you do? So many kind of events and everything, and family gatherings in particular. I think for me, I think this should be a really interesting one for you. It feels like, it almost feels illegitimate somehow to do different things for different organizations at different times instead of fitting neatly into one of these patterns. So it's great to have you on and to be talking about this.
Thank you.
So if you happen to be new to Delightful Dissent, it's a shared exploration of those kind of ideas and assumptions that people take a little bit for granted, but aren't necessarily as true as we might treat them. And this idea came about through my work with people taking pioneering approaches to complex and interesting issues. And Sarah is absolutely one of those people. And I found in this work that we often kind of trip over these hidden beliefs, these implicit assumptions. And really, I wanted to challenge some of those. And that's where the idea came from. So I hope the show gives you specific ideas from the topic that we're talking about that might help in your personal or professional life. But perhaps more importantly, I hope it gives you ideas about how you can go out there and challenge the assumptions that matter to you as well. It's called Delightful Dissent because, we are kind of, not necessarily agreeing with all of the received wisdom, but it's not about proving ourselves right at everyone else's expense. And it's not about it all being dramatically serious all the time. It's about really a playful exploration of just a different way of seeing things and different way of being and approaching the world. So the show is genuinely live. So if there are any technical issues, please do bear with us. And please do be aware that we might be talking about challenging or difficult topics. Today, I think we'll probably be in that kind of professional space and thinking about that. So if you have any kind of difficulties around your professional identity, or you find that difficult, then just please be warned that might be coming up. And we may also use strong language. So if that's an issue for you, then please know that we might well do that, or we might do that. So there aren't any perfect answers here. This is absolutely about exploring and asking questions of yourself and of us. If you're watching live, then please do ask any questions in the comments, and we'll bring them in where we can. If you're watching or listening to the recording, then please do get in touch with either of us and continue the conversation. And we'll be sharing ways you can do that at the end of the show. So, I first met Sarah through a mutual friend who I've noticed is already in the comments, which is lovely. So hello there. I really loved her creative and fun way of engaging with work, and particularly with endings. I think this is a really interesting one because, they're often things that we don't think of as enjoyable or we try and avoid. And I really love the kind of playfulness with that. So I really wanted to get her on the show and to share some more of her stuff. So could I ask you maybe to introduce yourself a little bit and the kind of things that you do, please?
Yeah, sure. And I suppose that in itself, that request to introduce myself is partly why I'm bringing the topic up today. That if you are someone that is not just doing one thing or doesn't have a traditional job, it can be quite you can feel like a rabbit in headlights when you're asked to present your life. And
Mm.
I suppose just to share like the experience for me as someone who has done many things, I've had, every time I meet someone, I'm like, who am I going to be to this person? Like, what part of my life do I share? You know, no one wants a CV when they meet you. And you also, if you're only going to pick a couple of things, you want to connect with them in a way that feels meaningful. So it's almost like I'm DJing every time I meet someone. Like, what's the song that I put on that's going to help, you know, which probably is overthinking it. But I suppose that's just the experience of when you have many things, that even the question of, oh, just introduce yourself and what you do can bring quite a lot of anxiety and quite a lot of like over analysis. And a friend of mine who is also multi-passionate gave me the tip a few years ago of like, just share what you're up to now, because like that's what's live, and no, like actually that's what's going to be interesting for you and for them. So I will do that today. And my website is obviously in the notes, so you can see some of the things I've done in the past. But what am I up to right now? Obviously right now I'm having a lovely conversation with you. And I'm also getting ready to, well, I've already started a summer of festivals where I am doing a range of jobs. So sometimes running music workshops. I was at a festival a couple of weeks ago where a composition was taught to 2,000 people, which was a really cool experience. So I had like worked with a Welsh composer to write a bilingual song that like the whole crowd would chant together basically at the procession. So, you know, I'm a composer, I'm a facilitator of music. I bring people together for creative experiences. I'm also at some of the other festivals doing artist liaison, DJing, ukulele workshops. So playing the piano in a band. So a lot of music, a lot of like working with others to do creative things. And then I'm also doing my coaching certification at the moment. So I've been working as a coach for quite a few years. But I am, getting certified, doing my 100 hours officially in coactive coaching, which is I'm in the middle of at the moment. And then the final thing, which you also alluded to in the intro, is my podcast, which is called Knowing When to Quit, which obviously you've been a guest on for, which is now going to be in series 2. And I'm wrapping up series 1 at the moment. So even though that's all I'm doing at the moment, it's still quite a lot of things.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Thank you. And I think I really love that, you know, what has energy now as the answer, because it's particularly for me, I find there is a core thing, but different people understand it in different ways. And so much of my work is in collaboration. And so being able to talk about what's exciting and what's got energy now really invites a really positive, fun collaboration. Yeah. So I really like that idea. I think that's a lovely idea, a lovely way of kind of starting to approach and unpick some of this. But yeah, what's kind of what brought you to working in this way? Have you always kind of worked this way, or is this something that you kind of came to a bit later on? Or
so no, definitely not always. Although I think I've always been someone that had multiple interests. Like if I look at my childhood and all of the different activities I used to do, I've definitely been someone that has not just had one thing that I've done, like got inspired by lots of different topics. And I would say, then it was, so I started my career as a teacher. So I did the Teach First scheme in 2008, and I trained as a full-time secondary school teacher, teaching languages in a school in Northwest London. So that was like full-time, proper job, you know, like this is my identity. It is a dream having that as your identity. What do you do? I'm a teacher. We all know what a teacher is. Like everyone has a story, you know, in terms of introducing myself, that was the whole other end of the scale. Very easy to talk about. And then, during my last year of teaching, I had this feeling of, because I want to say last year, it's a 2-year grad scheme and I stayed for a 3rd year. There was this bubble of like, I think there's other things I want to do. There's other things I want to explore. And I really see it as like, I went on a kind of a creative hero's journey or heroine's journey, you know, that sense of like, I need to go off and explore. I really need to go on an adventure, but not like traveling necessarily in the traditional sense, although there was a bit of that, but traveling my own mind, my own creativity, my own interests. And it took me, so I left teaching, went abroad a bit, did a bit of working with organizations abroad, came back to London. So it was in 2014 that I officially was like, I'm not working full-time anymore in one place. So it's like nearly a decade that I've been working for myself. But I would say at the beginning, it was like I worked 2 days a week at a school, 2 days a week at an office, and then had tutoring. And I was kind of doing a full-time portfolio of being employed. But it was in the summer of 2013 that I last had a salary job. But so, I'd say 5 years salary job, 10 years pretty much working for myself.
So there's that kind of, it's interesting because, you've got that, what some people call a slash career.
Yeah.
That idea of something slash something. I do this some of the week and that some of the week. Which is completely fine. It is interesting to have kind of gone through that as a stage and then moved into something even different again. So fascinating. Thank you. Before we really get into the whole assumption too much, have you got a quote that you could share with us? That kind of,
Well, I like this quote, and this is a quote that I heard first when I was in my final year of full-time work and was really seriously exploring doing my own thing, creating my own work. So you'll probably know it. It's don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive and then go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Which is Howard Thurman, who was an author, philosopher, theologian, educator, and civil rights leader. And it sounds like multi-passionate from that.
It does rather, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. I think the interesting thread around education as well. I think that's, that idea of lighting something up in yourself and others, the kind of the contagious, the ness of passionateness. It feels really, and creativity feels such a part of that somehow.
But I think, the reason I like that quote and why for me it connects to getting a proper job is that the best way to have energy and, that get energy back and have that kind of reciprocal energy circuit is to be working in things that give you energy. And if your whole thing is like, I need to go and do something meaningful, wise, I don't know, important, and we've got all of these like, perceived ideas, and it isn't actually giving you energy back, like it's not of use to anyone. So we can have this perception of what it means to like do something the world needs. But surely the best thing the world needs is like people who have energy to keep going, to keep playing and to feel alive with that.
It's one of the funny ones as well. And I think for people, the other side of this is people often worry about success or worry about, that they have the choice between essentially a well-regarded, well-recompensed career that they don't really enjoy very much, but they can do. And then something that they really care about, that really lights them up, that isn't associated with the same level of external validation in any sense, in terms of pay or in terms of social status or whatever. I just say on that, when people are doing things that are truly energetically reciprocal, I don't think they care about that stuff anymore. I think if you're still caring about this prestige, maybe it's not quite even the right thing. Even if it makes you feel a bit alive, I think there's still something missing if you're still looking at that stuff. That's interesting. Yeah, I think once you've got there, I kind of agree. For me, I think it's a very difficult step to take, though, all the way there necessarily. I mean, I don't know how you found that transition process. I almost felt like I didn't have much choice in the matter, actually. It wasn't planned in the way that it might look in retrospect. It was just, I was like, I can't carry on doing this. I want to do that instead. And this is how I might be able to do it. And I can't kind of work for. And I looked around and I was like, is there anywhere already existing that I can do this? And the answer was basically no.
And when you say do this, what do you mean by do this?
What I do, which is similarly kind of multifaceted and odd, and has all these different aspects. It's more like, I think of it as, it's just a slice at an angle through things. It's like they all line up and they are actually coherent. It's the really big challenge of kind of just taking a different angle through things. And when you want to do that, and the way that an existing organization or an existing profession thinks about how they work in the world, and you want to bring in different aspects, potentially from domains that are seen as unrelated, or as not having an effect in the way that you're supposed to have, that's valued in that space, or even potentially that seem to be contradictory. I think for me, a lot of that has been, there's a tension there, and it's almost like I can't be this and that in the way that it's either thought about or actually sometimes enacted. It's like you can't kind of do a certain thing and another thing, because they do genuinely kind of, the way that they work in conventional terms does come into conflict. And I think for me, that idea of just satisfying one bit and then satisfying another bit and then another bit, and then just trying to cycle around those separately became overwhelming and exhausting. So there was always some unmet need. And it was really moving to that point, to how can I create something that's more coherent for me? And I think for me, the other part of that is I left a fairly high status, fairly well paid IT job, and it's an interesting thing to leave behind, and all of the stuff that came with that, and I didn't necessarily realize came with that. But it never felt like, it always felt oddly precarious, because it wasn't everything. And I think that, that sense of precariousness, even though you're in something that's supposed to be secure, is a really interesting experience. Is that something you've kind of come across?
The precariousness of leaving or of staying?
Of staying.
Oh, I see.
I never felt secure in the job in the way that I feel secure in what I do now, in a different way. I feel that so different insecurities, like, figuring out where the money's going to come from, or like what I should do next sometimes. But on a more fundamental level, it actually feels more safe.
Yeah. Well, I probably wouldn't relate to precarious, but I relate to it like not feeling secure, like, or fully, I don't know. So my experience of being in full-time work at the point that I wanted to leave was that I did not feel I was able to fully express and explore all the parts of me, and especially my music. So that was a huge part of my life that I just wasn't engaging with through my work. And I worked in education and I loved it. And it was really, really lit me up. Like, I properly cared about it, really purposeful. But there was this gaping hole that was like, there's another thing here that needs attention. And I feel really lucky that at the point that I was exploring this, and probably the reason I was exploring it at all, was that I came across other communities who were, well, first of all, through John Williams's work, the 30-day challenge scanners. That was 10 years ago. That's when I came across that work. I suddenly had all these role models of people who had, found what they lit them up and made money from it. And I was listening to podcasts, and probably wasn't even podcasts at that time, like reading books and listening to whatever, like, engaging in materials that I was like, oh, I can see a model now. I can see what this could be. So I think that was hugely helpful. I also think through the Teach First community, it's quite standard to do the two years and then set up a social enterprise. That was a trajectory that I saw time and time again, people who'd gone through the program go on to do. So I was seeing examples of leaving traditional work patterns and it being successful for people. And then joining like the Impact Hub in Brixton, my office job was full of people who were exploring other paths. So I actually think I was in a really fortunate position that it seemed exciting to me and seemed like totally possible that it didn't feel precarious to leave or to stay, really. No, the precariousness view was about staying. But in terms of, I think, someone's written in the chat about money, I was seeing examples of like how to make money from stuff I love. Like, it didn't seem like it was going to be a kind of the trade-off didn't seem to be financial for me, because I was getting really good like just advice and models of how to keep money going. And I may add, like, I never had your like high paid salary job. Like, I was working in education, I probably maximum earned 30k, and it felt like a good salary for me in that amount. But I've never had to like let go of a really high paid job. I've never had a position where people were like, you can't leave because you're managing, I never had that jeopardy. So in some ways it was easier as well. It wasn't a big, shall I step down from some huge thing? It was like, oh, what's next to explore?
Yeah, I think I kind of felt that edge. For me, I broke all the rules in how I left as well. Like, the idea, I told the organization I was working for 6 months out that I was leaving, and was like, I'm leaving on this date. Let's kind of work with that. And actually it went very well. It was very positive. So yeah, because it let everyone prepare, and it let everyone kind of get used to the idea, including me. And I think there's something around that kind of transition, and that, and I think for me, partly the money worries are part of that. It's a transition. It is also, depending on whether you want to look at it in kind of performance terms or in kind of energetic precariousness type terms, is if something's kind of more your intrinsic and authentic self, it's actually easier to be successful at it. It has a kind of level of sincerity, anything that you do that really comes from you, that isn't present if you're not connected that way, which people love. And the other side of it, I found, is like, I was always like, well, okay, I'll feel comfortable once I make the next level. And that never happened. In fact, it was going in the opposite direction. That's partly why. And I felt I didn't want to continue in that part. And I think that idea of there's a different kind of security, is like, are you really being valued for who you fully are? In that job, does that fit you well enough? Or do you feel like either there's a frustrated part of you that has value but isn't allowed to deliver it, or there's even an unacceptable part of you that you have to kind of keep away from that work identity? Because I think both of those are, that can become a really difficult thing if you're, with this idea of a one fixed identity, one fixed job. If it doesn't fit you.
Yeah, and I must say that everywhere I worked, I don't think I couldn't be myself. Even like my last job, I say that I wasn't able to do music, but I taught everyone the ukulele, and we regularly did songwriting workshops. So I basically like maxed out the amount of music I could do when music was 0% of my role. Like, they were really lovely, and we're just like, let's do it. But as in, I don't think I've ever had the experience of like, I've had to shut down who I am. And maybe that's because I just couldn't go into those kind of organizations. I suppose where I would say I had that maybe the most is in teaching, only because you have to like just keep this professional front in front of the children. And there is a certain, like, even with the staff, you're kind of all on all day of like, you've got to be a certain way. Maybe that was sometimes tiring of like, I kind of just want to swear now, or I just want to complain about this. And I don't know, you have to be, there's acceptable ways of conduct which are important for the children, but I sometimes found that really tiring.
Yeah, I think that's very much the kind of thing I'm thinking of. And you know, if you're if that proper job comes with that and it doesn't fit how you kind of would intuitively express yourself all the time, it can be really, you kind of need to be constantly self-vigilant, which is really tiring.
Yeah, and I've had so many experiences like in office jobs that I've done, actually just thinking of it now, where like I say stuff and then I just see everyone looking at each other like, oh dear, or like, that's not how we do things. And that is such a familiar feeling for me, that I'm just blurting, being myself, just asking a question of like, I don't get why we're doing this, and that you see this like, Yeah, I remember one time like having to train someone up, which meant I didn't have time to eat my lunch. So I asked, could I like have this first like 10 minutes of the afternoon to have my food so that I could be fueled up for the next thing. Yeah. Anyway, they were like, you can, but just so you know, we're not happy about this. And then like my boss took me into his room. We're like, I think like you're not coping with the time here, and like we're worried about you. And I'm like, can you just stop being such a dick? Like, I'm just asking for 5 minutes to finish my food. It's not that I've got problems with time management. I don't know. It's just stuff like that where I'm like, can we all just stop being so box ticky and like rigid? Like, I know that you have to have stuff in place when you're running operations and things, but it's just stuff like that. It was just an example where I'm like, I find that infuriating.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the rigidity of it is one of the things, you know. It really is that kind of how challenging it is if we don't have any latitude to kind of influence the job, because we often do have some. So
your bookshelf's more interesting right now, is that what
it's like? Also, yeah. Sorry, camera's gone weird. So I'll try and get it to focus back so everyone's not just looking at the books behind me. It's a really, really difficult. Really difficult thing, and I think we often have more latitude in a job than we assume we have. So this is one of the things, is if you are struggling with this, is looking for what degrees of freedom you do have in the current situation. Like you and your thing with the in the school is a really good example. You know, is like to have the degrees of freedom to introduce some music.
Oh, so yeah, that was a startup, but yeah.
Oh, sorry, the startup. Yeah. Sorry, but to be able to introduce those bits in is a really helpful thing. And I think that idea, of a change, being able to have a bit of latitude in that, and to be able to, okay, well, we'll do it this way, or we'll approach it differently. And I think for me, that's a really important thing. It's also a really important thing if you are hiring, or if you are in designing a job, essentially, which is what you're doing when you're writing a job description. A lot of job descriptions are written really badly. One of the secrets of recruitment is no one really knows why they're hiring. It's very rare. Mostly they're just like, well, someone did something and now they've gone and we're not really sure what they did, and we're not really sure how to get someone else in. Because most people's jobs are actually quite complicated. When we're talking about more professional jobs, we're talking about experts.
Yeah.
And almost by definition, we hire experts because they know stuff that other people don't. And so that whole thing feels quite weird, and it's quite difficult to. So it makes sense that there's a bit of latitude and a bit of space in how we approach these things, and we give people, ourselves and other people, space. And I think for me, perhaps there's actually, if this is if you do very neatly fit into boxes, great. you're probably not listening to this podcast anyway.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, then it's also to be aware of the signs of, like, what are the indicators of something with a fair degree of latitude?
Yeah.
Is this in a startup? Is this, is the description quite qualitative, and does it say, does it suggest openness, or is it something that's like, do this, 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 this?
Yeah.
And kind of getting a feel for the way that the organization approaches it.
Yeah. Are they wanting someone to do tasks, or are they wanting a mind to solve a problem in a creative way?
Yeah.
If it's a task list, it might not be the right thing.
Exactly.
Unless the tasks are things you want to do.
Exactly. And I think for me is like, I know I'll get bored with any task list. So for me, change is an important part of it. And it's also like, is this space going to grow with you? Because I think this is another important question. It's like, are you likely to, because we're all, this weird idea that we kind of stay in, we talk about jobs as if they're the perfect job and we're going to stay in them forever. And yet we all know that in 2 to 5 years, we're probably going to be looking for another job, maybe in another organization. And it's like, actually, will this grow with me? Will this organization grow? Is this organization going in the direction I want to go? Is this bunch of people going in a similar direction to the one I want to go? Rather than that idea of that direct match to tasks. And I think also for people hiring to think in these terms as well, because this is one of the really important things I found, working in tech. It's like, I've hired someone 5 years ago. And in 5 years, you could be using, like, the platforms change completely. We might be like using different tools in different spaces to do different things. So if I've like been utterly obsessed by the specific skills when I hired someone and not thought about the trajectory, it doesn't quite work. And I think that negotiation, like thinking about the direction as well as the specifics, feels a really big part of this. And for us as a, in terms of that a proper job, I guess it does have a kind of fixed direction. That's also part of a proper job, actually, isn't it? It has like a, certainly a professional job, it has a known pathway.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason I brought this topic is because I wanted to pick apart what it meant by a proper job. And I mean, I think at face value, it's like a job that's a 9 to 5 in a specific organization, like you said, with like a journey, a specific trajectory. And I wonder when we will start seeing that, like, well, I guess it's also this word job. Is the job the organization, or is the job the fact that you are being employed somewhere or getting some, getting money in full services, in which case you don't have to be attached to an organization. And then this idea of proper, the thing that's coming to mind is like sexuality and relationships. And that for a long time we would, and probably still, sadly, seeing that like a proper relationship is a heterosexual one, a proper relationship is one when you're married. And that, you have to really fight hard to see the legitimacy of other types of relationships, other structures, other sexualities. I feel like we're in the same place with jobs and work, that I constantly feel that I somehow am not like properly working because I don't have an employer and because I don't have a salary and I don't have those structures. And yet I am working all the time. I cover my costs. I have a lot of different things that I do, that I don't feel that I have a job. And so sometimes feeling this, like, even that I'm unemployed, that can come up for me. And I suppose what I'm like, my hope is that at some point we see more legitimacy in different ways of working, in more, and I think we are starting to see, But, you know, even a lot of people who call themselves freelancers really are contractors for like a year at a time. You know, it's like, oh, I work for myself, but I'm kind of working with this organization for like 3 years. I would say that that's not typically, that is a different kind of thing, isn't it? Obviously, you can, there's some degree of like freedom in that, or there's something different. But I suppose what I'm proposing here is like the idea of completely redesigning how we think about a working week, whether we even see it as weeks. You know, I'm really trying to allow myself at the moment to lose myself for days making music, knowing I'm not getting paid for it right now, but knowing that it's part of a bigger picture for me, and that there may be one day next month I will do one gig that will like fund a lot of other stuff, but it's not typical. But yet, if I try and fit myself into a structure of a proper job and give myself like a 9-to-5 timetable, I'm going to missing out on the flexibility that I've given myself, or the kind of expansiveness. And so, yeah, I suppose there's like this. I feel really conflicted about this proper job thing, because on the one hand, I would love to have one, you know, and I do, but I don't know if I think I do, because of how society is structured, and because of what is perceived as normal. And as I think we talked about when I interviewed you on my podcast, I was like, why is this still a thing? And you're like, well, sometimes it's just easier to, you know, it's like, it's confusing for people when you're listing 5 different things you do. And I wonder, you know, it's the same with like pronouns and stuff. Of course, it's easier for us to use what we've always used. Doesn't mean it's like we should always do that, though. We shouldn't like avoid like identifying people in the right way because it's easier. And anyway, these are like my kind of emotional thoughts about all of this.
No, I think it's really helpful. I think it's, you know, I sense, I really, you know, listening to you speak, it triggers there's a sense of frustration in me at some of this. And like, there's a bit of me that says, actually, the way that we're doing it, the fixity of the structure is actually quite counterproductive very often to the aims of organizations. And the more latitude, more flexibility would actually be a really helpful thing for those organizations. You know, it's like, it feels like, you know, we know it all supposes all of this kind of proper, it supposes we've got a very predictable world.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we know what we need to do. We know the kind of person that can do it really well. We know what we want out of this. We know all of that stuff, and it's transparent and obvious to be able to figure that out. And I don't think the reality of a lot of professional work is actually that anymore. Things change so fast that, particularly at the edges, at the leading edges of stuff, it doesn't actually fit. And it's like, the other part of me also thinks there's a flexibility around methodology. It's like, yes, we can be clear what we're trying to achieve, but how we achieve it, we might do it different ways. And I think this flexibility, you know, looking for people who can take multiple pathways and have you know, have the ability to do so, and thinking about how we support that, is one of the really interesting areas kind of to explore in terms of actually how we develop work as, you know, the future of work, the kind of working practices, and how we adapt and how we change. Because for me, a lot of what I kind of miss on a personal level from having a proper job is the resources of an organization that supported me in what I was doing. You know, I miss that, having colleagues who were incredibly talented at something I'm not, and being able to work alongside them very easily and very readily, and having that kind of just at my fingertips. Whereas now it feels like I have to cultivate that and reach out, and I spend a lot of my effort is actually devoted to creating that situation, that the job that just kind of came with the job before. And I think for me, that's part of the frustration and the attraction to go back to working for an organization, is I wouldn't have to do a ton of the stuff that I have to do now. And I don't think that's like an immutable law of the universe. I think that's a design question.
Mm. Yeah, and I suppose the other thing that comes to mind as you say that is, you know, the book Essentialism, Jeff McKeown, and he
Love
talks
that
about,
book.
don't ask what makes you happy, ask what problem do I want to have. And like hearing you talk about that, my sense is right now the problem is I have to create all my own colleagues. I have to do a lot of the kind of sourcing of the structure and the community and the, you know, the connection. And I wonder what the problem was that you were putting up with when you worked full time. Like, was it that you didn't feel like authentic, or it wasn't, you didn't have, like, what do you think it was for you?
I think the issue is that the problems that I experienced and wanted to resolve lay outside the bounds of what the organization as a bureaucracy felt comfortable dealing with.
Mm-hmm. So is there a sense, was the problem you had like powerlessness or futility? Feeling ineffective?
Not directly. So it's an interesting kind of not quite a paradox, but again, in this kind of this living the separateness of the existence is I perceived needs in myself and others and the organization and ways to get to them, and the kind of bureaucratic processes of the organization perceived different ones. Repeatedly, what I perceived was shown to be valid. There were opportunities and threats. We missed opportunities and collided with threats that were perceived a long way out. And I was by no means unique in that. There are a lot of my colleagues' experience very, very similar. But somehow the structures, the machinery of the organization didn't let us engage with those, and instead it prioritized other things, which turned out to be not very high value in either direction. But somehow collectively we couldn't address that.
Yeah.
And I think for me that structural difficulty, and particularly when I was working in a part of the organization that actually delivered this stuff, so it wasn't just that we were it was in our domain of responsibility to make sure that the organization could like use and act on information, and yet we struggled. And so it was like I think for me it's more that than that having to disconnect how I'm perceiving and experiencing from how I'm having to behave.
Yeah. So is
as
it
a part of that role.
inauthenticity? Is it? Would you call it an inauthenticity? What would you label it as, like, in terms of like what problem were you having there?
I think it's more around what I had to prioritize and attend to, is that where my attention was drawn, both in terms of positive interest and avoidance, wasn't where I was supposed to be attending to.
Right.
And the methods as well.
Whereas now you get to do that through being working for yourself, but you don't have the community.
That's it. And I don't have the structural support. And I think for me, a lot of my interest now is, and I think the essentialism, I read essentialism, and then I read very closely some books around Stoicism, and this idea of the obstacle being the way. And it's like, well, if this is my problem, this is the problem. And I often find organizations, I think my frustration was we couldn't focus on what was in front of us and the skills that we had. It was like it was almost like the imaginary things that you have to set up, you have to approximate, you have to try out. But it was like, we modeled it this way, and we're going to believe the model rather than our reality.
Yeah. Has making it fit the story rather than actually seeing what's going on.
And I think for me that, there's when I hear proper job, like that it has echoes of that for me. It has echoes of
Yeah,
the
okay.
someone, the kind of professional true believer, or the corporate true believer, and I find them slightly
Yeah,
scary people actually to engage with.
I agree. Yeah. So what I'm hearing from this idea of the proper job is, on the one hand, we could make it synonymous with that kind of work. Or on the other hand, we can pick apart what that even means to have, what proper and job actually mean. But if we're making it synonymous with the kind of corporate 9 to 5, then yeah, what would be the benefits of that? Like, why? And I suppose when I think about that, like, one of the big things I come back to is like just societal wiring of like what we have been taught, shown to be the norm. And it's like proper job centering. And I know things are changing, but I think there's something, I feel like there's something in my physical experience that is, it's almost like a toxic relationship, or irreversible being pulled back to it. It's like my nervous system knows that pattern. So wouldn't it just be simpler to follow? And that's something I worry about, that when I have desires to get a proper job, that it's coming from a place of actually needing to calm my nervous system down, which has been trying to do something different, because it takes a lot to be going to be creating new pathways, not just in the world but in our mind. And I think this is the thing I always say to people when they work for themselves and they're like, why am I so tired? Like, I have all this free time. It's like, no, but every day you are creating new pathways in your brain. You have spent your whole life like following a system. And so everything you're doing takes energy. And it doesn't mean it's the wrong thing, but it's just noticing, like, any habit building, we're going to go back to our default when we're tired. When we're overwhelmed, we're going to go back to the default. And I feel like societally, our default is go and work for a company, be looked after, just get told what to do. Just don't keep your head down, and like, don't be too difficult, and just get your pension. And there's times when I'm like, God, I want that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see Anya's written decision fatigue. Yeah, that's so right. Yeah.
Yeah. I really, I completely, I experience similar sometimes, and it's an incredibly challenging thing to be kind of pushing an edge. I think I've definitely, one of the things that I take some comfort in is with the innovation work is we kind of make this assumption that there's only one kind of innovation, and that's basically to outcompete, that we do something better. But there's a different kind of innovation, which is to do something different, do something that has no direct precedent. And the difficulty, the challenge in that is actually just the making it work. Once you do make it work, you have no direct competitors. And so, but we have this kind of linear assumption that's related to competition and known domains. So it's like, so it can feel like, and also that linear working is like, I go to 9 to 5, I do the same things every day, and we kind of incrementally move towards where we want to be. Whereas for me, it's like, I read for a day. Sometimes, if I don't have a meeting, I'll start following a thread, and I'll read a book, and I'll look up a paper, and then I'll Google for a bit, and then I'll read a book, and then I'll follow that thread. And maybe it'll just then peter out. And then a couple of days later, I'll be in a conversation with someone, and I'll be like, right, this. And then it will work into something that of value. But it's that the fact that we can't work out necessarily ahead of time what's going to be valuable, either individually or collectively. That feels
Yeah.
like the real challenge here. And having a proper job really only makes sense in domains where that value is transparent. That's not to say there aren't many of those, but there are domains where that's also not true.
Yeah, and I'm feeling like there's so many organizations that I've come across recently who are incredibly like just carving a new way of working. And like I know Anya works for the Museum of Happiness, and there's an example of just building self-care at the heart of the organization, really thinking about how they're developing people, the messaging, like purpose-driven. Another group I know called Unleashed, and I see that in the way that they're building their organization, they are trying to do it in a new way. So I also feel like it can be unfair to umbrella anyone who has a salary as like, oh, you're one of them.
Absolutely.
And but I think we're talking about a certain type of like traditional org.
And I think it's the proper bit. It's funny actually. I've if you work in kind of alternative organisations, they don't have the same prestige on some level. They don't have the same authority. You tell someone you work for like an organisation, a small organisation, and you have a job title that kind of modern job title, which doesn't, and people are like, what's one of those? It has actually it in many ways it has the same problems socially as the kind of mixed kind of multifaceted work. When you're doing it for yourself, it almost feels like what really is being asked is to fit into a specific agreed category with a specific set of inputs and outputs, and like what
it's a script, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a script. It's like when we ask people, you're right, we don't need them, we're actually expecting them to say good. That's the script. And so when we say what do you do for a living, we expect them to go, I'm a lawyer, I'm a teacher, I work at this organization, I'm head of marketing. Cool, we've done that bit, now let's get a drink. It's like it's a script. People aren't interested. So when you not in a horrible way, but I think we talking about this, that you can like you often gauge like, is someone actually asking or are they being polite? And like you kind of gauge from that like what you're going to tell people. But what I also find is that when I mention like one of the things I do, people are then, oh, so you're a composer, oh, so you're a musician, oh, so you're a facilitator, oh, so you're and I'm like, well, I can't, and it happened the other night that this girl, exactly, and this girl introduced me and said, because last time I met her, I talked about composing, so she went, Sarah's a composer, and I was like, that is true, and it's not true, right? Like, as in, this girl then was like, oh my god, you're a composer, what do you do? I'm like, well, look, I have composed things and I make music a lot, but I wouldn't say that in the way that you're imagining, or I assume you're imagining that I am a composer. It's like, I think that's what I struggle with, of like, I can bullshit and say like, yeah, I'm a composer, and yeah, I'm a DJ, and yeah, I wouldn't say saying a coach is not bullshitting, because I do generally do it a lot, but I say some of these things I like dip into. I feel like I'm being a bit misleading when I say that I am that, because I know what it means to do it full time. Or I have friends who are like, no, but they're actually, and when I was doing comedy and people would say to me, Sarah's a comedian, I was like, I'm not a comedian. Like, I do comedy. I run a comedy night and I practice it, but I'm not a comedian in the sense of like going to things every night and like trying to get on Live with Apollo. And then maybe that's the proper job in the creative sense. Maybe that's like, the only way to be a comedian is to be like aiming for Live at the Apollo and gigging 5 times a week. Like and I guess it's also this thing of, are we talking about a job or something that we have access to? Because, if I say my job is a composer, I think that's misleading, but I am a composer. I do compose and I do make music. And so I feel like there's something here for me of like the integrity piece of claiming something. Yeah. And the discomfort when I feel that there is a projection onto me of this being bigger than it is, that I feel it is. And maybe that feels weird, because I'm sure for some people they want it to be seen bigger. Yeah, Anya's just said, is a proper job perceived as just doing one thing? And I've been reading up a lot recently on human design. I don't know if this is something you've come across, Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and reading about the type I am, which is a manifesting generator, which and when I read about it, it's like it says you are here to create new paths, to do many things all at once. You need to be busy. You need to have many interests. People are going to think it's weird, but you're actually paving the way for a new way of working. The skill is of that type is test stuff out quickly and then move on. Yeah. And they say there's a lot of people that think they have ADHD who are actually manifesting generators. It's like this quick, okay, I'm learning the lessons. We talked about this on the podcast, didn't we? Like, I'll learn it, I'll learn quickly, and then I'll learn the lessons. And actually that speed and that turnover is a real gift to other people who take years to learn something or realize something. Yeah, I think it's, but I've been reading up on it the last couple of weeks, and I'm like, oh, well, like, if this is legitimate, imagine if in a couple of years or 10 years we could be like, someone says, what do you do? And you're like, well, as a manifesting generator, like, you'll know that that's not the right question. Or, you know what I mean?
I think it's a really good point that, we point to something more intrinsic about ourselves. And as someone that works with neurodiversity and also has the human design thing of manifesting generator, I think it's a really interesting thing. And, this idea of like, how we use our more intrinsic nature as part of what we do, and that's at least as important as the kind of surface level. Because the other part of it is like, there's a huge amount of qualitative difference between people, even in these very well-defined professions. So there's a kind of flip side to this. But it really is I think for me, it's really loosening this idea of a proper job and on in both directions, and being able to play with the degrees of freedom that are there, and also valuing degrees of freedom. I think this is part of the thing, is like not necessarily worrying if everything is tidied up, as long as it works for now.
Yeah.
And for us and for others, I think there's also for me, there's something about thinking about what I'd like to take away and think about a little bit is like, what question can I ask instead of what do you do? How can we ask, what's the what how
what
can
you
I
up to at the moment, I guess, is one.
Yeah, I think that's a much nicer way of putting it, and thinking about what we're really asking when we're asking that question, and what we're really saying when we're responding to it, and what we're saying if we that feels like a really like a nice way to kind of play with this a bit more and start opening up that conversation for others and with others as well.
And what it makes me think of as well is like, where am I asking questions from a place of quite a lot of stability? When I think, like, I ask people all the time, like, where do you live? For me, I live in London and have done for a long time. And for others, that might be very stressful. They might be like not sure and like about to have a massive change of where they're living, or they might be a nomad, or they might not have a home. And I suppose there's also what ways am I asking questions, like, or people, and the way people ask about, are you married, do you have kids? And like, for me, again, that's like, that can be quite a triggering question, and I can get quite defensive about it. For others, it's just like, oh, well, everyone I know is married with kids. That's just my reality. I guess there's a side of this where I'm starting to be like, are we all just so fucking precious at the moment about any question, and like, can we all just chill out a bit and we'll like be able to deal with it? But I think there's a sense of like awareness, like just being noticing, like, what am I actually asking here? When I ask someone, and sometimes I say to people when they say, what do you do for a job? I'm like, what do you actually want to know? Like, do you want to know how I make money? Do you want to know what I spend my days doing? Do you want to know what I'm trained in? Because they're three different things. And so what do you actually want to talk about?
It really does loop back to, it feels like, the real core of this is asking better questions around, in this space, because they're all potentially interesting questions. And when I say better questions as well, questions that don't presuppose an answer.
Yeah.
That's the other bit. is it, and you're talking about all of these things, and I really like, this, how you've brought in all of these different kind of institutional type structures in society and related them to work. I think that's a really helpful lens to look at work through, because we tend to think of it as this not personal thing, where it's deeply personal, really. And I think that's a really, really big aspect of that kind of, how can we open up the conversations, and how can we find out more and connect with people, rather than just trying to put them in neat little boxes.
And another thing, I think we can give ourselves more power as the person being asked the question. I think a lot of the time I immediately give my power away and be like, oh, what are they going to think about me? And like, what do they want to know? And how should I position myself? Whereas there's another way of going, what do I want to talk about today? Like, who do I even want to share anything with this person? Like, actually taking about a bit more of the authority. And like, if someone says, hey, where do you work? Maybe you say that day, I don't want to talk about work today. Or maybe you say, oh, it's been really interesting because I kind of don't really, I've got this kind of different way of working. Maybe you talk about that. Or maybe you say, yeah, I'm a musician. and you just share about that. And people, no one's going to sit there and be like, sorry, how many hours a week did you work? Like, this isn't your job. If they do, they're strange. I mean, I remember the friend who I used to run the comedy night with, she said people would always say to her, do you just do comedy? And she's like, what they're actually saying is, please tell me that I was right in giving up my creative dreams. As in, please tell me that you're not just doing comedy, because I need to know that this isn't an option. And it was just so interesting. She's like, that's what they're asking, really. They're asking, like, is it possible to be a creative to like earn money from your creativity? And actually, the question is often more about that person. Like follow-up questions like that of like, how do you make money from that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, that whole space is, I think that's a really understanding that's where this, the need to have a proper job, where does it come from us, or does it come from other people? In any of this, is this box, is this category for me? Is this helpful for me? Or is it just because someone else wants me to have it? And teasing those apart, I think it's a light work, really, but it's so helpful to be able to do so.
And I was at a festival a couple of weekends ago, and I don't think anyone asked me all weekend what I did for my work. And I was like, got to the end of the weekend, I thought, why do I feel so calm? Yes, it's probably because I've been at a folk festival, but also because all the conversations have been around just like the here and now. Maybe people said, where do you live? I think that came up, but no one asked me about my work. And it was really lovely just to connect with people on creativity, music, the presence of being at a festival.
Absolutely.
And I think maybe that's a takeaway for people, is like challenge to ask about something different. And I see Anya's written in the chat, like, what are you excited about right now? That's a lovely question. But even that, like, maybe you're not excited about anything. Maybe it's just like, how are you? And like genuinely listen.
Yeah.
Because, I think there's also something about like, we need to always have something that's like really exciting and really lights us up. Some days you're going to be like, do you know what? Like, nothing's that interesting today. And that should also be okay.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really, like, the allowance of that in ourselves and others, so important. I would kind of like to start wrapping things up now and kind of bringing things together, really. So if people want to reach out to you and get in touch and talk to you about kind of this stuff, or have thoughts about, or exploring their own relationship with maybe leaving a proper job, or perhaps if they're thinking, or organizations thinking about how they can be a bit more flexible with this, how can they get in touch with you? What's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, so I've got a website, sarahweiler.com, which I think will be in the show notes. That's where everything lives. You're also welcome to email me or message me on LinkedIn. I do a lot with individuals around beautiful endings. So I support people. I'm trying to call myself like an end of project doula. So, like you have death doulas or end of life doulas who like help people transition into that stage of not life, afterlife. But I was like, actually, I really enjoy helping people think about how they're ending things beautifully. So there's an invitation there, if that resonates, to have some coaching together, to do some sessions. I'm also thinking of, I might be hosting in the autumn, like a kind of more of a group program around that. So yeah, I'll definitely if you stay connected, also on Instagram, which is like Sarah_carousel. I'll be sharing stuff there, and my newsletter, which is where I'll also share. I do a lot of writing about this, and I've got, basically go to my website and you'll find it all. But then also organization. So I do stuff around quitting. I have this like framework where people understand what's going on when they want to quit. So I run workshops around that. I do kind of leadership coaching around that. Thank you, Anya, she said. Yeah. So I'm really interested in making sure that people are in the right place. I think that's the thing. Like, whether you want a proper job or not, like I actually trying to be more neutral about it. The reason I get worried about people in a proper job is if it's not right for them. But there are lots of people who are thriving in these kind of environments. So it's also about finding that. But if there's any part of you that's like, I'm curious of what else I could explore in myself. I'm curious about what else I could explore within my organization, like that kind of entrepreneurship. Let's have a chat. Let's see if there's some work we can do together. And if it feels more like you would like a passive, consumption at the moment of the work I do, then like going on my blog on Medium, which you can find through my website, see the podcast, you can listen. There's lots of people exploring quitting various things in their life, not just jobs, but quite primarily things like that. And just like, let's stay connected and see if things come up.
I really love that. And I think, for one of the fears when you're exploring kind of things that feel like doubts or uncertainty is very often that, well, it's definitely going to go in that direction. And I don't know if I want to go in that direction. Whereas one of the huge values, particularly, if we're talking about, if you're in a job and you're ambivalent about it and you sit and you explore alternatives, and you're like, no, this is, I really, you look at it again, you can enjoy it more for what it is and commit to it in a different way. And I think that's the other side of that. It's not about presupposing one way or the other, but being able to engage with the possibility and see which one works for you right now.
Yeah, and I suppose I have also been exploring getting a proper job in the last few months. I'm open to whether that could be a way for me to thrive at the moment. But I'm also, I really, when I put this call out on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, I was like, I really tapped into where I thrive. I was like, this is the resonance I want to be in. Like, these are the topics I love. This is the environments I know that support me. So like, let's see if anything matches that. And it was really important for me not to be like scrolling and being like, oh, could I be this community manager of this random startup? It's like, no. Be in the energy of like, I feel really great. And this feels exciting. And I'm trusting that if there is an organization that matches that I will find it. And if I'm not, then that's not where I'm supposed to go at the moment. But it felt really good to just even be like on display and like be contactable for those opportunities. Because I have for so many years, like not even gone there because I've been like, no, I'm on my own path. And actually coming back a bit more into the middle now and going, there's some good stuff there. Like we've talked about the community, all of those things, it's not to be sniffed at. If it's the right environment and there's some things that support, it can be hugely supportive for someone who does enjoy lots of things, because there's, the nature of a job is to have all of that. So yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. So don't necessarily get a proper job, but don't rule it out either. That's
absolutely.
Yeah.
Do what's right for you.
Yeah. Completely. Super. Thank you so much, Sarah. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Welcome.
Really interesting to explore, and I think really helpful to explore, hopefully, particularly in the context of LinkedIn, and which is often used for job search and in both directions. So hopefully it's kind of got people thinking a bit, and if it has got you thinking in the audience, please do reach out and kind of get in
Yeah.
touch with either of us. So yeah, thank you for appearing on the show. Really great to have
So
you on.
welcome. And I also want to acknowledge Yvonne, who I know has been writing some things that I haven't been able to pick up on yet, but I'll have a read. But thanks for your input as well.
Yeah, thank you everyone for all of your comments and questions. I really appreciate the input. It's really nice to have that live as well. And it is your support in the audience that really makes this possible, or at least legitimizes my excuse to talk to interesting people doing interesting things. So please do share it out if it's useful to you, and share it with someone who might benefit from it. Upcoming and past episodes are available on YouTube and LinkedIn, and the podcast is available, though is still really out of date. If you search Delightful Dissent on your favorite podcast platform, you'll get stuff from a little while ago. I am hopefully much closer to resolving that issue, so in the next couple of episodes I'm hopeful that this ending part where I say I'm still fixing it will change, but we shall see.
I think we should do a Delightful Dissent called I Should Upload My Podcast Episodes. we can discuss whether that's actually true.
I don't think I really want to argue against uploading podcast episodes, because I'm pretty good at doing that already. There might be something interesting around. I have to do this as an interesting kind of theme in general, though, I think, and relates very closely to this. And actually also related to this, and the next episode, I'm going to be talking to Oana Junku, who's an agile leadership DJ, and really very working in kind of quite similar ways, I think, in kind of similar influences as well, which is really cool. And we're going to be talking about the idea that you shouldn't change your story. Don't change your story. And I think this kind of feels related to me, that idea that it's like, well, I was this and now I'm that. Oh, right. Okay. That's not allowed. It really feels like changing your story is a kind of inconsistency, or is a weakness, or untrustworthy. Whereas I really don't think that's fair. I think it's much more, if things change, why shouldn't we change how we describe things? So I'm really looking forward to exploring that. And normally, obviously, the podcasts are every couple of weeks, but this one's going to be next week, and that's going to be 5 p.m. UK time on Tuesday, the 21st of June. So I very much hope to see you there. But in the meantime, please do go out there and make some delightful dissent of your own. Thanks and goodbye.